Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Hello everybody. A very warm welcome to this session where we will talk about some very important things with a little bit of participation from the next pavilion. Apologies for that. We have a wonderful audience here, but also online. My name is Rupa Mukherjee. I work for a non-profit organization called Helvetas. It's a Swiss organization. We work in 34 countries. I've also been an IPCC lead author for the 5th and the 6th assessment report, and now I'm a member of the Swiss delegation to this COP. It's my honor and my privilege to have you here today and this fantastic panel with us, and also a worldwide online audience. What I would like to do is to make this a little bit personal, because we are all coming from the negotiations. We hear these big words: climate resilient, inclusive, transformative, etc. And our minds buzz with these big words. So I would like to bring them down a little bit to ground. And for my community, I come from the region of Bengal in India, where we've had a history of famines and large numbers dying in these famines. So when we meet people in my community, we say, "Have you eaten?" So instead of "we Gates" or "how are you," what we say is, "Have you eaten?" And not just eaten anything, but have you eaten rice? And this is very important because that is the measure of well-being, eating rice and having enough rice to eat. Now, rice is a very important crop because, based on how you grow it, it can be a great source of methane emission. As you know, methane is much more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, but it lives for a much shorter period of time. So it provides us opportunities for mitigation. It is also a very water-sensitive crop, so it demands that we adapt to the changing climate. It is grown by billions of smallholders, many of them women. So it's really the crop where you have to think about inclusion, because you could also grow it on a large industrial scale. And finally, there have been many, many varieties of rice historically, and the knowledge about this has been kept with the women or families, smallholder families, who would anticipate how the weather would be in the future and decide whether I do a short duration rice, I do a tall variety because there might be flooding, or I do a drought or a salt tolerant variety. And these are all the topics that we will talk about today. We will talk about inclusion. How do we do agriculture? How do we adapt our agriculture systems so they're inclusive of women, they're inclusive of their traditional knowledge, they're inclusive of smallholders? How do we get enough food to the ones who do not grow enough and have to buy? So these are the urban poor, these are the food deficient households. How do we make our food systems inclusive so they take food from the producer to the consumer in a faraway land? And as you know, food prices are also very, very sensitive to national policies. So how do we make our food systems work so everybody around the world has adequate food security? It is also very important that we look at the mitigation dimension and we look at transformation of our food systems to make them more climate resilient and move towards more agroecological practices. So I'm delighted to have a panel that has all the competence to talk about these topics. We will have one round of inputs from this great panel. We also have the Slido QR code and number there. I invite all of you in the room, but also our online audience, to share your comments, your impressions about the session through Slido. I have a colleague here, Karina, who will bring them to the audience. And then we will have a second round of comments and questions from our panel. So without further ado, let me introduce this great panel to you. I'm highly privileged to be sitting next to the State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture of Germany, Madam Claudia Müller. She's the Parliamentary State Secretary to the German Ministry of Food and Agriculture since 2023. She has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2017 and is a full member of the Parliamentarian Defense Committee and the deputy, not anymore, I beg your pardon, somebody has to update this, but it's great that you bring all this wealth of experience to this panel. Sitting right next to her, we have Nosifo Jezili, Ambassador. We all must congratulate her because she has just been elected to the CFS, that is the Committee on World Food Security, and she's also the ambassador of the Republic of South Africa to Italy, permanent representative to the FAO, as well as the governor of the IFAD, that is the International Fund for Agriculture and Development. Then we are highly privileged to have Matthias Moge, who is the Secretary General and CEO of Welthungerhilfe, one of the hosts of this event, since September 2018. And he brings a wealth of experience, including a long stint in Mali as the regional director. Next to him, we have McLaren's Mandaza. He's the Technical Director of Environmental Sustainability and Climate Action of World Vision for the Southern Africa region. He has a PhD and possesses many years of experience in agriculture and humanitarian sector, but also is a negotiator and has been a key player in Sharm el-Sheikh. We are delighted to have Elizabeth with us, Elizabeth Gulugulu. She represents the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. She works on the interlinkages of biodiversity conservation and agriculture, sustainable farming, building resilient communities, and climate action and youth empowerment. And very importantly, and with great pleasure, I welcome Ryan Kasim, who represents Act for Food, Act for Change, also the World Benchmark Alliance. He's the youth delegate here. He has been supporting the cause for good food for all, and he's the regional focal point for the MENA region during the World Food Summit in 2021. So you will hear from all of them and have an opportunity also to comment on their input. But first, let me invite you, Claudia, to deliver your address.
Thank you so much, Rupa. And well, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot even tell you how much delighted I am to be on this panel on this important subject. And yes, I have been a member on the Defense Committee. I had to leave that once I became State Secretary. But really the connection of security policy and now agriculture and climate is really something that's now starting in the security community. They are starting to talk about that as well. And I really think that we have a momentum in that to see that we have to connect all these different dots. And it always comes down to the question, do we have adequate food for people? That really is a big point when we talk about climate. It is a point when we talk about security and everything. So very happy to be here today. Yes, the right to adequate food is a human right laid down in the international law. But the truth is, 1 in every 10 people on our planet is suffering from hunger. Approximately 1/3 of the world population does not have reliable and safe access to adequate and sufficient food. Now, prior to 2015, we actually have seen some improvements, so the number had gone down. But since then, unfortunately, the trend has been reversed. And it's due to a mixture of conflicts, wars, the climate and the biodiversity crisis, we should not forget that. And then, of course, with the pandemic, and all of that has set us back. And while the conflicts and wars that are unfolding around us demand our full attention, the climate crisis in particular has become even more visible, and it's hitting us hard, and I mean everywhere in the world. We're not just talking about the global south and countries most affected, we are seeing it in the global north just as well, so there is no more hiding from it. We have the climate crisis and it's impacting us on our everyday lives and on food security especially. Because wherever we look, and I mean, we've seen Canada with the big fires, we have had droughts and fires in Europe just as well. So really, it is visible, nobody can look back anymore. Now the good news is, we are not powerless. And together we can make a difference. And we have seen today with the Emirati Declaration, now 152 countries have committed to it. It's a good start. I know we're all not completely satisfied with what we are hearing from the negotiation, especially about the global stock taking yet. But this 152 countries give me some kind of hope that we really can move forward with this topic. And it's not just policymakers, it's farmers, it's consumers, it's researchers and scientists all working together on this. So what can we do exactly? I think the answer is twofold. There are short-term answers and most importantly, there are long-term answers. So in short term, we're talking mainly about humanitarian assistance. We're talking about distribution of food. We're also talking about securing ways for food to come to the countries. I mean, what we have seen with the war on Ukraine, how much that has affected not just the possibility to export, but really how trading route shifts and how that impacts prices. And again, that impacts especially the most vulnerable countries. And we also see that food systems are not resilient yet. And so we have to talk about resilient food systems. Now, and this is really the fundamental change we have to bring it. To be more resilient, we have to be more climate friendly, to be more climate resilient, and that means we have to bring mitigation and adaptation together, because without mitigation, the effects of climate crisis, of the climate crisis, we will not be able to adapt to it. And this is something, when somebody talks about adaptation, we have to remind them, it is mitigation just as well. Those two have to go together, they have to go hand in hand. Now, from the global perspective, you could say there is enough food. It's just a distribution, it's a distribution of assets, but really to ensure that we will have harvest there for our children, grandchildren, and by the way, we're often talking about 2030 as the goal. Now for Europe, that is 7 harvests away, just 7 harvests. So it's really not, I mean, sometimes to us it sounds like it's very, very far. It is not. It is really short-term thinking we have to do there. Now, we need to make the production more resource conserving and more climate smart. So therefore we have to really strengthen the agroecological practice, use natural processes and promote closed circles. So to become simply more sustainable, by the way, more sustainable also means to take the social effects into account. Only then we can truly be sustainable. Now in Germany, for example, we are striving to have 30% of our land organically farmed by 2030. Saying that also means that 70% will still be conventional. Now we have to bring organic technologies, because it is technology just as well, also more into conventional farming to be more resource friendly, to be more agroecologic, and also the conventional farming. We're working on animal welfare, also reducing emissions by that. And with that means also to take the consumers with us, to have systems that are transparent so that people really know where their food was produced and how it was produced. Because there are enough surveys saying that, at least in Germany, 2/3 of the people are interested in that and would base their decisions on that. But they are not able to really see it yet. So we have to bring in transparent systems to make it more visible. That also means we have to change regulations so that it will be possible to change animal husbandry and also to give aid to the farmers that are changing their system, because it's not that difficult. But also, if we talk about that, we have to be sure about one thing. If our agriculture and food systems have to be transformed, we have to transform our way of how we eat, how we consume. That is also part of it. And I know a lot of people don't really like to hear it, but we have to look, especially as Northern Europeans, into a more plant-based diet. Because we see a lot of the resources go into fodder, not food. And that is something that is also putting a heavy burden on our resources. Secondly, we also have to focus on the food loss and waste within the value chain. That is also something we are focusing on at the moment with the German government. And then also, once again, strengthening a more regional and seasonal based diet. Now, looking at all of this, we shouldn't be naive. agriculturally, and by the way, also forestry, also that is part of it, are working in a biological system. So we cannot simply produce food without emitting anything. That will not be possible. But we have to work together to lower the emissions. And the great thing about this is that we have technologies, or actually the nature is the technology to also capture emissions. And we should really use that. I mean, very often we talk about CCS, CCU, but the technology we have to fight climate change is nature. And that means we have it here also in agriculture. So what we are doing in that perspective is not just focusing on our national level, but also on our international corporations. We work closely with FAO and CFS. CFS, I really have to say that, is for us the important identity, because there you have the countries coming together, you have international organizations, you have civil society and the business coming together, working together. And for the German government, it's important to strengthen CFS and also the work with FAO. We are part of the FAST commitment. We are working together with FAO on that, stimulating these processes. And we invite every country to be part of it. Let me just add one more point. We also, of course, have to look at the people. We have to look at the farmers, especially the smallholder farmers, because they are feeding 50% of the world. 50% of our food comes from smallholder farmers. And when we look at their needs, it's something different the big corporations need. And something that's very dear to my heart, we have to look at the women in that field. Because if we provide equal chances for women to access to finance and resources, we could increase the productivity by 1/3, just by having equality. So that would actually be an easy way to really have a look at this part of the world, and especially this part of population, I mean it's half of the world, to ensure resilient and reliant and sustainable food systems. And I think we have a lot of other ideas, but I have such a great panel here. I really want to give the word to them, and especially to Josipa. I really love hearing from her. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed. Those are very inspiring words. Realistic, laying out the challenge, but also saying very clearly that we are not powerless. And here, I would really like to invite you to tell us, Josipa, about what role the CFS will play, or plays at the moment, to put climate-resilient food systems and agriculture systems higher on the international agenda.
Thank you once again for this opportunity. And speaking after Claudia is quite encouraging, because I think both in her statements, in her remarks, and the posture of the German government towards the Committee on Global Food Security is something I can talk about for the whole afternoon. But the commitment is there, and we appreciate it. The CFS, as the Committee on Global Food Security, is a unique platform, and its uniqueness draws from the fact that it's got about 140 currently member states, which are countries who have signed up to be members of CFS. And we have multiple stakeholders in the form of participants from civil society, from the private sector, through the private sector mechanism, indigenous people, women in particular, and most vulnerable groups. And that makes it an institution that is more versatile within the UN system to be able to develop policy guidance. And this period being the year where we have reached 20 years of right to food guidelines. And the right to good food guidelines were adopted by the FAO as the guidance that would be provided to nation states and practitioners to ensure that we do live up to our commitments of ending hunger by 2030. And you've already heard the minister, or I always say Vice Minister Claudia from Germany, outlining the statistics. And it's by no mistake that we currently saying we're sitting at around 700 million people that go hungry in the world globally. And whether we are going to be able to meet the ending of people that go hungry per day by 2030 is a big question, especially in having highlighted some of the impacts and challenges, both in terms of the conflicts in the world. We've just come from the pandemic, which disrupted supply chains. Therefore, in terms of movement of food, we are beginning to also say, if we are to respond to climate change, we need to make sure that food is produced closest to where people are, and even limit our reliance on long distances, because that also contributes to the carbon footprint. If we can avoid it, why not? And Germany, having listened also to the fact that other countries are already adopting strategies for farmer approaches and indigenous people's knowledge being applied in growing food and making sure that we avoid also food waste, but more importantly, being able to grow food in a manner that's more responsible to nature. And therefore, the CFS provides an opportunity for all the stakeholders to therefore develop guidance in terms of how, especially people that are closer to where food is produced, smallholder farmers, as well as pastoralists and other young youth groups which are participating in urban food development. So this is something that is quite unique about CFS. And coming to the policies that have already been developed in respect of the inclusive nature of the CFS, we have gender guidelines which are aimed at empowering women and other genders in respect of being able to be recognized as producers of food, and producers of food in a manner that is more sustainable. We have data guidelines. Again, this is an area where we have also identified a gap, indicating that information flow, especially at urban household level, at rural household level, we do not necessarily know what exactly is the capacity of production from those households. Our systems currently have a gap in respect of us being able to meet those areas of production. And these are some of the instruments and tools that the CFS has produced in recent times. At CFS 51, this is an instrument that was, these are the two instruments that I've just mentioned have been utilized. Now, coming to the further opportunities, if CFS is a multi-stakeholder platform, what is different between the CFS and other UN platforms? It's different because, one, we have to make sure that there is alignment across the UN system on those institutions that have an ability to contribute both positively to production of food and resilient food systems. So the CFS is an opportunity in the context of climate change to develop an integrated approach by stakeholders where there is going to be a canvassing of approaches, and therefore it would be able to produce instruments that would be more inclusive and that would have a broader buy-in in comparison with other documents that are produced elsewhere. The chairperson or the facilitator spoke about the IPCC. We have an opportunity here utilizing a policy interface that is informed by scientific work that's already been undertaken. So in the CFS, we do not start the real research, but we utilize the knowledge that's already been generated to make sure that we have got a powerful and responsive action in that respect. So this is where there is convergence of policies, and if the policies are implemented at local government level or national levels, we should be able to see that there is going to be a change in terms of how we are going to address our global challenge of food availability across the board. And I further want to highlight one of the mechanisms of developing the policy instruments, which is the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition. Here we assess and analyze both current trends in state of food security, and that is produced through the scientific work of the FAO, and that information, which therefore we rely on, is what is utilized to facilitate negotiations to develop the policy frameworks. The second step then involves that the scientific panel makes available to the other stakeholders and enable the participation of that inclusive process in order to make sure that we are able to develop policies, not blue sky science, but applications, and that would be utilized by member states, especially governments. There are governments currently that do not have even a policy on food security, and that is a big gap, and it is not because there is lack of guidance from the multilateral system, and therefore the CFS has to be able to take the position of being the influencer, being visible, and make sure that those products, there is an uptake of them to be utilized to bridge the gap on food insecurity. And furthermore, with the high-level panel of experts identifies emerging issues and helps member states to prioritize future actions. And this is an area where there are key focus areas which are already covered in the multi-year program of work of the CFS that was adopted at the CFS 51, and one of which entails the inclusion of people and beyond just or gender. Some of the vulnerable groups that Claudia spoke about have not yet been recognized as contributors to the food transformation system, and therefore indigenous groups are prioritized in terms of the work stream that will enable them to contribute to this high-level knowledge and applications for a response that is appropriate in the times of climate emergencies. And lastly, I would like to also outline that we do have other policies that were developed over the period of the existence of CFS, which are just also based on the right to food, and some of these instruments have been co-created, as I already indicated, for resilient agri-food systems. And in the MyPow currently, which is the multi-year program of work for the CFS, we are considering then the development of a new instrument or a new tool which is going to provide policy guidance in relation to our ambitious actions as a collective within the UN system. So in a nutshell, I think my input is more about the UN mechanism that is versatile under the current circumstances. We do have a plethora of platforms where food systems transformations are discussed. However, in terms of an ambitious and a just process which is inclusive, CFS is that alternative, and I think it's not an overstatement to indicate that we will be able to deliver what member states expect and all the participants of the CFS, and I would like to pause at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. And once again, Many congratulations on your election, and we have great hopes from your leadership of this body. So thank you very much. Matthias, coming to you. From what you heard from Claudia and from Nosifu, and you also produced the Global Hunger Index, which is a very important instrument, again, for policy convergence. What is really needed now to meet the needs of ending hunger and building climate-resilient food systems? What's the civil society perspective?
Thank you, Rupa, very much. And let me begin by making some reference here to the COP. Because we are here in Dubai, and I think we have to acknowledge, first of all, that there is a first declaration, or the first declaration of this kind at a COP on sustainable agriculture, on resilient food systems, and on climate action. This is for the first time such a document which has not maybe a very binding role, but which has been signed already by 134, 52 now, okay. So yesterday or before yesterday, I think it was still at 134. Thank you very much, good to know. But I think this is a good, very, very good and important step. And you can also see, if you look into the documents of the global stocktaking, if you look into the various documents which are currently discussed, there is discussion about food, there is discussion on food systems, resilient food systems, and food security. And I think this is important, that this important topic has arrived also in the climate discussions and the climate tracks which are currently discussed. Also, if you look at the global goal on adaptation, on the adaptation fund, there is now, I hope, some progress. I think it's still under discussion. But let me go a little bit into the very practical examples. I think many of the INGOs and NGOs, of course, have a lot of experience gained in the last years to work very practically on building resilience against climate threats. And Claudia, you have mentioned the threats. I'm not going into that again. So we have a lot of technical adaptation strategies, such as drought and flood-tolerant seeds, for example, regenerative agriculture cultivation techniques, investments into access to digital services, which are becoming more and more important, building resilient infrastructure, but also helping people to be prepared against the climate threats, droughts, floods, sea level rise, and strong winds. But of course, this is not enough. A very crucial thing is, how do we do it? So we have to do more. In particular, when it comes to the huge inequality which we see, national-wise, but also international-wise. This huge inequality makes people very vulnerable. And we have to fight that and to provide access to affordable clean energy, clean water, healthcare, early warning systems, and education know-how, and access to land, just to name a few, but I think these are very, very important. And maybe finally, social safety nets. Extremely important if we want to reduce vulnerability against climate shocks. So we call on governments, and I would like to use this opportunity, of course, here, to call on governments to invest more into adaptation funds. The global goal on adaptation is here under negotiation, and I would really like to call on governments to come up with a very clear, ambitious goal and to make the necessary financial contributions. There are around 160 million pledged at the moment, but we all know that this is not enough. We need investments into integrated approaches, so always looking at the nexus of things. Yeah? And I think also Claudia mentioned that already. In the end, we need to reduce emissions. We have to be very clear that we have to phase out of the fossil fuels and reduce all kinds of harmful substances, pollutants. Otherwise, we will have more global warming and even more climate threats. Thank you. First round.
Thank you very much, Matthias. really bringing it to concrete things that need to be done. And we have already a lot of comments, thoughts from people coming on the screen there. Some are questions, some are reflections, and it's good to weave that into our inputs. I come to you now, McLaren's, and you represent World Vision. It has a very strong community approach for climate-resilient food and agriculture systems. Can you share a little bit with us as to what's happening there? And what are encouraging signs? What can we build on?
Yes, thank you very much, Rupa. It's such a pleasure to be participating at this COP28 on this Agriculture and Food Day. And the momentum is very high from the high declaration of agriculture, food systems, and climate action from our highest policy makers. So as World Vision, we are glad to be here. So let me just start by appreciating that as World Vision, we are fortunate enough and we're privileged enough to be working in the frontline communities. And we witnessed the effects of hunger, children malnutrition, and droughts firsthand. So as our approach, since we are child-focused, we take a development program approach that addresses the root causes of nutrition and food security at community level. Of course, we take into cognizance what are the stakeholders available, what has been undertaken. So we try to take a holistic look at the gaps and opportunities that are available. So through this work, we have been able to work with the communities in strengthening climate-smart agriculture, food, nutrition, and sensitive crops. We've also been pushing for community-based reduction trainings at the core of the communities. But secondly, we are strengthening the regreening communities as a core project model in our operations. So we work in communities where the land is degraded. So we have a drive to restore nature. So through the regreening communities model, we are able to walk through the communities and the stakeholders to identify the key drivers to land degradation and how can these contribute to the food discourse as well as the issues that has to do with food nutrition. So embedded in the regreening communities model is also farmer-managed natural regeneration. So this is a simple concept and approach that we've been using over the years, whereby farmers are able to identify areas that are being threatened by deforestation. They prune the trees so that the trees can actually realize their full potential. So through the farmer-managed regeneration, it is a double-edged approach of having both mitigation and adaptation outcomes. So farmers are also able to integrate apiculture, and whereby they'll be able also to earn income, and they're also able to integrate even agroforestry. So these are some of the interventions that we are doing, but that are led by the communities themselves and combined with various partners that we work with. Thirdly, I want to bring to the attention we often hear of a figure that 700 million people are hungry. But what does that mean? Less often do we consider the children that are also hungry, the children that are suffering malnutrition. So as World Vision, we have recently launched Enough campaign, which is mobilizing 3.4 billion in the next 3 years in 67 countries to deal with issues of child malnutrition, as well as also to address the data gaps that comes with nutrition. So much often we do not have the statistics and data on how many children are going every day to bed hungry. So through the Enough campaign, we'll be able to address this. I'm glad that the previous speakers have been saying what we are doing, is it enough? So on this Agriculture and Food Day, whilst we are putting the agriculture and the food agenda on the table, it's also a double burden for us to think through that what are the needs of the most vulnerable, especially the needs of the children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That ties so well with what Claudia said about not only food for today, but the next generation, equipping them with all the capacities to live to their full potential. And here, Elizabeth, I'm really keen to hear from you. What are your expectations from COP28? Today we are discussing the global goal on adaptation. Today is the Food Day. And you have the great opportunity to talk to Claudia, to talk to a member of the CFS, and two leaders of the civil society. So what are your expectations?
Thank you so much, Rupa, and thank you again for the platform to speak. So my expectations for COP28, I'm sure everyone is expecting to look at what the Global Stocktake Report is going to say. So for the Global Stocktake Report in terms of mitigation, I think we all agree that as agriculture, the agricultural sector also contributes its own fair share in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And when we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, I think there is a lot to think about, especially from countries from the global south, their expectations, how are we ensuring that there is technological transfer to those countries in order for them to reduce the GHG emissions? How are we ensuring that as they are trying to adapt to regenerative agriculture, agroecological practices, they are not too constrained when it comes to financial resources, so that they can, at the end of the day, they can have a good harvest and feed their families, because that is really important. So this will be my expectations on the global stocktake, what mitigation means to someone who is in the rural communities, being affected by floods, being affected by heat waves, but at the same time who are relying on farming and agricultural practices to feed their families and their homes. And definitely on adaptation, I think from where I come from, it's really unfair to start talking about having or encouraging farmers to adapt if we are not giving them the resources to adapt. It's good, yes, we talk about adaptation here, but I think we also need to put into consideration that when we leave this place, we are going back to the same situations, the same scenarios that we have left our communities in. So my expectations is, yes, we have had pledges from different countries on how they are going to, support the loss and damage, but also in terms of adaptation, I think it will also be important to have some resources channeled to the agricultural space in order to improve the resilience of different communities coming from the global south countries. Then also, I think, overall, I think these are platforms whereby, creating these platforms, it creates interaction and promotes collaboration and coordination. This event has been organized by different organizations, which is quite good, because we are also leveraging on the space, right? If we create platforms, if we create good partnership, these are the same partnership that will also sometimes come on board when we do need support in terms of upscaling our agricultural practices and ensuring that the food systems themselves, they are quite resilient. Claudia was highlighting about how COVID-19 affected our food systems, but if we are to be affected by another COVID, do we think our food systems will be resilient? So these are some of the things that we should start thinking at these platforms as you're getting into the negotiation rooms to say, okay, fine, we were affected once, but are we ready moving forward? As we are building forward after COVID, how strong or how resilient are our food systems? How are the global south countries going to survive? So I think in summary, this is what I do expect, at least, though the expectations might not be fulfilled, but at least these are my expectations, and I have a little hope that maybe they might.
Thank you very much. And I'm absolutely with you in having high expectations, high ambition, because that's what will drive the process. So let's keep that going. Thanks a lot. Now I come to you, Ryan, and you've been engaged in this topic for quite some time. Tell us about the food system challenges in the context of Lebanon, where you work, MENA, and are you able to work with multilateral systems to influence also national policies?
Right, thanks a lot. I'll keep this one really short so that you can give me more minutes in the next round.
Sure.
All right? I'll make it bet with
Negotiations.
you. Listening to food security interventions, obviously, but also in these conversations through many years, I think everybody knows why the world is really food insecure. The question is, what is really stopping people from ending world food insecurity in an equitable way and leaving no one behind? The question is really, why won't you stop food insecurity rather than what are the hows of stopping it? We really know how to stop it. It's not and especially when it comes to food security, it's not a conversation of technical knowledge. It's a political game that people play. And, coming from Lebanon as well and living through several wars in specific, you do notice that these humanitarian aids that are coming when food insecurity arises are taking too long. You used to have wars that were 1, 2, 3 years, and that was fine for some aid to be given. But now, since these wars are going 8, 9, 10 years, I really ask, and this is a conversation we've had with the World Food Program a lot, and we've criticized them very heavily, that when will this food aid stop? I mean, it's a band-aid solution to a root cause that you won't really fix because of politics. And so the question is, why won't you, what interests are really preventing you from speaking about that? Because it's really not a technical problem in so many cases. I'll give an example of how young people have been working at the policy level and food systems in Lebanon, because it sounds like an obsessive question decision makers always ask. In 2021, we had the UN Food Systems Summit. After that, we had the organization I'm representing, Act for Food, emerge as the main youth organization in this, or in support of the summit. For up until now, we had the stock-taking moment this year in July. And now, for the first time, we have a national pathway in the country. I'm trying to work with the national convener, who, by the way, is the only parliamentarian who's a national convener in support of the Food Systems Summit, to embed youth activism into the national pathway. Now, what does meaningful youth engagement really mean in food systems? We really don't know what it really means until now. And I have to criticize myself as a youth advocate, because we still fail to have consensus among the youth groups on what that really translates into. But at least before we have that very global definition of what meaningful youth participation in the national pathways of food systems are, we can at least start somewhere. The national convener has been very supportive until now. I always am a skeptical person, and we will follow up on that. But Lebanon is a very donor-dependent country, and so it's really difficult to be able to ask for government support in many cases, because young people require financial support, capacity building support, which is all led externally by Western organizations, which is completely fine, but just to note it down, that's the issue. It is a historic moment for us, yet I still don't have anything to share with you in terms of historic accomplishments, because it's happening right now. This happened in July of this year. Right now we're in December. Hopefully by next year we'll have something embedded into that process. That's what I can share on youth inclusion into those food systems events. Yeah.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your honesty. It's very important to name the problem, and then we work towards finding the solution. I also hesitate to put the burden of finding solutions on the youth. We are all part of the problem. We all have the capacities to also find the solution. Right? So we have some really interesting things coming up there, and I think one of them provides the lead to the next question that I want to ask you, Claudia, and that is, how can we keep climate-resilient food systems and agriculture on the political agenda and keep it high on the agenda of the COP?
Well, actually, we see one of the answers there already.
Yes.
Somebody answered it. what we have seen that even COP, evolves with the topics it's treating. And COP27 has introduced this field. So it's now the second COP that is really treating this issue on such a high level. And we are moving forward with that. I think one of the things we really have to keep in mind that we find partners. Even here at COP, everybody is in their own silo to some extent. So energy people are talking about energy and so on. So really to break those barriers and to see that all the topics are interconnected. When we are talking about end fossil fuels, of course we're talking about fertilizers as well. We're talking about fertilizer production. When we talk about carbon storage, as I was saying, we have to talk about the natural way of doing it. So we only have to break down these barriers of thinking between the different fields. And then maybe also find partners that we have not thought about yet. Really thinking out of the box to create use the moment we are having to enhance it, so that everybody thinking about climate change and fighting climate crisis automatically has to think about food systems, because it's really so closely interlinked. I don't really see how anybody can get around it, to be honest. So I think Egypt has managed to put it onto the agenda, and I think it will stay there. And at least we will be pushing forward.
Thank you. That is very nice to hear that very clear statement that we will put it forward. It did take till COP26 to get it on the agenda, 27 actually, not 26. Maybe I come to you now, Nasifu, and ask you, what are the main challenges for bringing climate-resilient food systems, and what's missing from the international discussion? Now, we have a commitment by 154 countries. Some countries have hesitated to sign it because there are many commitments that are coming up, but actually actioning and working on them is where the attention should be now. So what's missing in the international debate on food systems?
I would like to say that I think one of the things that's missing is in the COPs, even if we have the second COP discussing food systems transformation, the voice of civil society is not fully there as yet. Even when some of the demonstrations that we've seen over this COP, they are more about fossil fuels, less about food and food poverty and the link to climate resilience. And secondly, even the call for resources. In terms of climate finance, I heard the figures are about 0.5, not more than 0.4, 0.5 of climate finance that is contributing to food systems transformation. If we are going to really resolve and ensure that we save the planet, but at the same time we save lives and make sure people have access to food, there is going to have to be an increase in resource, either redirecting resources that are already existing, not necessarily only new resources, including some of the harmful subsidies in order to make sure that we are able to have investment, tangible investment in agri-food systems. And my third point in respect to civil society, again, I would not want to utilize the old word of watchdogs. I think the civil society must still keep governments true to their commitment on living up to a right to food as a human right. And most countries that do not have policies in respect of enabling food access and also acknowledging the best practices for enabling both acknowledging the contribution of traditional knowledge systems on tilling the land, drip irrigation systems to avoid wasting water. At a high level in the FAO, the UN, the countries that are member states have placed water as part of the agenda. Again, when we talk about adaptation in the climate platform, there is water, there is a food, a nexus, and land. And land degradation, again, is about best practices for producing food, and producing food in limited land spaces. And those are some of the main issues that I would want to highlight. And there is a role of both the private sector in catalyzing finance, and there's more reliance in actually private sector response in respect of food systems transformation. And my last comment would relate to other platforms, which are UN platforms. Biodiversity COP is not only the climate change COP, the biodiversity COP, where we deal with issues of land and ecosystem services. How do we make sure that the voice, again, in terms of food and transformation, agri-food systems transformation is on the top of the agenda in all of the multilateral platforms. And I think the CFS can contribute to enable both engagements at a political level, but of course, not all member states that are in other multilateral fora are members of the CFS. And we have to utilize both in New York, because the CFS reports to ECOSOC, but also Geneva. Geneva is an area where human rights issues are discussed, and we only hear about conflicts. We do not take matters of food and right to food and make them topical in those platforms. And I think there are opportunities for us to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And truly to work across the 3 Rio Conventions, to look at the nexus between land, water, and food, but also to work together with civil society, not only as watchdogs, but also people bringing concrete solutions, a lot of experience, a lot of presence on the ground, because we do struggle to have a pipeline of projects that are meaningful. I come to you now, Elizabeth. We still have, a little bit more than 24 hours, a bit more, not exactly 48 hours, because the COP will close, I understand, sharp at 11 on the 12th of December. So what do you think still needs to be done to make this COP, let's not talk about the next one yet, fully inclusive and contributing to the agenda of resilient food systems? What do you expect from this COP still on this topic?
Okay, thank you so much. I think we really need to work more with the non-party stakeholders if we are talking about inclusivity. Because non-party stakeholders, they are quite diverse. They represent different voices. We're talking about indigenous communities that are also important when you're talking about, food systems. They represent, the marginalized communities. So the non-party stakeholders, they also need to be on the table when you're discussing about these issues. We're also looking at the private sector. What is their role, right? So many times they have, acquired land. So many times they have also contributed to loss of biodiversity. They have also contributed to, making our soils are no longer that fertile because, they were not putting these things into consideration, but they also need to be part of the conversation. I believe in a conversation whereby we are leaving no one behind, because it is quite important that each and every stakeholder knows their role when it comes to, issues to do with sustainable food systems and, conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture. So this is really my hope that let's try to put all stakeholders on the table. All stakeholders should understand that they do have a role to play, including young people. It's not only about, shouting in the streets, demanding for change, because things are moving, as I have realized. The spaces have changed, and young people, we also need to up our game, acquire certain skills, even if it means the negotiation skills. It's an art, we need to acquire that. Research, it's a skill, it's an art, we need to acquire that. If we manage to make sure that data is available, it makes it easy for the people that are negotiating in the rooms, because there is data that is backing that information. So each and every stakeholder has a role to play, and I hope this is the message that should be shared before this COP.
Thank you. So very powerful and so very pertinent. Absolutely. Really hitting the nail on the head. And it opens the space for my next question, which is to you, Ryan. What are the enablers and barriers for meaningful participation of youth in the COP?
It's, all right, it's working. So
It's working.
now we warmed up. Now I can get to the part where I can put my accountability police on as a youth and speak very honestly. I'm going to give you a few facts that I've been gathering through this week, also through last week, and I'll let you decide what you think about COP28 as well. Number one, we know that now fossil fuel lobbyists are 4 times higher than ever in this COP at 2,456, a little bit alarming. Second, you did see that there was this declaration on food systems, which is a historical moment for this year. But after that, what happened when all the world leaders left on their private jets back home? We saw that the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on implementation on agriculture and food security, negotiations concluded with no agreement on substance, postponed until June 2024. Lovely urgency towards 2030. Third, the GSD document, the Global Stocktaking document that is being compiled this year, fails to include food systems. The word agriculture was mentioned once, the word food systems was mentioned 0 times, and the word food was mentioned 3 times. This is compiled last night. Not a single party, okay, Michael, you mentioned this, Claudia, you were mentioning that this is a historic moment. Not a single party of the 130 plus signatories to the Emirati Declaration raised the omission of food systems. So why do you pledge on a declaration when you are not willing to put it into the negotiations? That's the question I have. You pledge, great, but then what happens? Why did you not put it in the Global Stocktaking document? That's the question. I'm sure they have been, the world leaders and the heads of the delegations of those countries know or are very well aware of, that they declared the statement, but then they did not put it into it. Also know that this year is the hottest year on record. Emissions are set to rise at a faster rate in 2023 than the 10-year average before that. And finally, that the GST document concludes that we are not on track to meet the 1.5, and that there's a 66% chance we might miss it. So, is COP28 a successful COP or not? I think you know the answer to any COP. The problem is that we look forward to the next COP as well, which is contradicting to the idea that we are in an urgent situation. Let's just postpone until next year. Or COP is also a hub for climate organizations and governments to get together and discuss. It's not. It should end at one point. That's what I always say. I'm not looking forward to COP59 or whatever. It should end at some point because this is a problem that should be ended. And then we can go all back to our lovely lives that we have. So what does this mean to me? Evidence shows that this is a failed food COP in specific, not talking about anything else. Second is that I believe every year should be a stock-taking year. I don't know why we have to do a stock-take every 3 to 5 years. The stock-take has showed that we failed since the Paris Agreement. We don't have evidence that shows that countries are moving towards a 1.5. So lovely declarations, lovely plans, but action and implementation fails. And so in front of the camera, everything is lovely, but behind the camera, we do need accountability. Who holds who accountable? I'm still wondering that question. And so my final question to myself, and I never asked this to anybody, but I asked this to myself. How do we redefine what is positive political declaration? And how can we clarify or draw the line on where we see success? When do we applaud each other and when do we not? I personally do not applaud the declaration because we've seen tens of declarations before. Now, yes, is it a historic moment? Okay, yes, it's historic because you've never done it before, but what does that really mean? So unless you prove that because you're already failing on the NDCs, and I mean, nobody in this room talking to the governments who are supposed to do that, already failing on your existing NDCs. So now you want to add food systems into that, make it more complicated. Yes, this is my question. I'm a little bit skeptical. It is a historic moment for food, yes. But the problem is that we don't have accountability. And I really feel that I'm very thankful to be on this panel so that we have an honest opinion of where we are. The data doesn't show that we are on track to meet the 1.5 target. I do not applaud any declarations at all until I see proof that it is worthy of being uploaded. Give me the accomplishments and I will be the first in line to applaud. But not until then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. And I'm so glad that we could warm up the setting to the extent where you could say all of this, because this is vitally important and it has to be said. Now, let me come to you, Matt Clarence, and ask you, continuing on the same thread, we all talk about agroecology and to grow agroecological practices, have more money going towards this. Are we doing enough or are we falling short?
Yes, thank you very much for this. So in the climate change discourse and also in transforming our food systems, we've often discussed about agroecology and so many other like-minded terms have emerged, nature-based solutions, climate-smart agriculture, regenerative agriculture. But the question that we also probably need to ask is, do we have the common understanding of agroecology? But I think evidence and the prominence of the need to transform our food systems is showing that agroecology is becoming more and more acceptable as a way to limit the dependence of our communities on external inputs by making sure that they socialize more with the natural resources that are available. And I think over the years, stakeholders have come together, including FAO, in making sure that we really understand the 10 elements that makes the framework for agroecology, which has also been extended into 13 principles. So I would ask, which government, which development partner doesn't agree with the principle of synergy? Who doesn't agree with the principle of transparency, diversity that comes with agroecology? So whilst we are not yet at 100%, but there is scope and opportunity for us to be upscaling what works. But what we might not want to see is using one term or practice as a panacea. We want to have a systems thinking as we transform our food systems to be inclusive and to be resilient. So over the years, we have seen that the issues of agriculture under the UNFCCC process, they've been on the periphery. So when agriculture was brought in, we've seen that now there's convergence of ideas from government, civil society, on the need and the agents of actually transforming our agriculture, not only for agriculture, but for food security and food systems. So the current negotiations and the decision that agriculture sector got in Sharm el-Sheikh in the previous COP, it was for them now to implement the activities under agriculture. And we've seen that part of the pathway to implement that, there is scope for agroecology as a future topic, as a way that can also transform the systems. I've been seeing that in the questions, people have been lamenting at that less than 0.3% of climate finance flows to agriculture. Yes, it's very worrying, but we have also seen a trend whereby each and every year, climate finance is increasing, but not at the rate that we all want. So the question that we also ask ourselves is, with the momentum that we are gaining in agriculture, including on the acceptance of agroecology across governments, can we not also take this opportunity to canvas and rally behind agroecology and other transformative agro systems for them also to be equally funded? So over the years, we've also seen many national governments having agroecology policy and strategies that are coming up. So this is something that is really coming up, but the question that we always ask ourselves is this enough? But yes, it's not yet enough, but there's scope for us to do it better.
Thank you very much, my Clarence. I come to you, Matthias, on the question of adaptation, because we work with millions and millions of smallholder farmers. Their needs are very context-specific. Are things in place to support them to adapt to the big changes that they're experiencing, or are we leaving that burden to the weakest sections of our society?
Yeah, let me first refer to Rayan. Thank you very much for your open words. And coming back to your first intervention, I would like to applaud you that you are taking place, or that you are part of these national food systems pathways, because I believe that this is a very good way how to address food systems resilience in a national context and also in a more local context, and to define what is the context here in this country. What do we have to do actually to address questions of resilience and food security in a specific country? And from there, I think the COP is not the only place, one has to say, where we need to address food security, resilience. There are other, I think, ways to address it, and this is, I think, the UNFSS or the CFS. There are other fora where we need to address these questions. But I absolutely agree, what we have so far is pretty weak, and it could be much, much better. And we need commitments, and we need accountability mechanisms, of course. Otherwise, it is just declarations. Yeah? And we have a lot of declarations and initiatives already going on. When it comes to adaptation, I think there are some interesting new initiatives on the way. There is the locally led adaptation initiative, which provides, I think, some good thinking and some good ideas. And I'm not going through all the principles, but some principles I think are really important. And for example, developing decision making to the lowest appropriate level. Really go down, involve people, involve communities, involve the most vulnerable, women, youth, children, in these discussions. Addressing structural inequalities faced by vulnerable groups. I mentioned that already at the very beginning. Providing predictable financing. And I think this is something which is very often missing. If you go down on a community level, on a regional level, people are telling you, we have no funds. Funds are locked up in the capitals. Yeah? Nothing is actually reaching the local level. Investing in local capacities. I think this is so important that we address the local capacities and increase their capacities in planning, for example. Yeah? What is really resilience planning? And for that to happen, you need capacities. And last, ensuring transparency and accountability, because we can do a lot of things. If there is no transparency, nobody really knows what is going on. If there is no clear accountability mechanisms, we will not progress. These are just a few of these principles. There are 8 principles in total, but I think this is really important also to discuss with the national governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. And indeed, thanks a lot for also responding to the challenge that Ryan placed before us. And I will come back to all of you panelists for your last closing statement, so keep that in your mind, let it cook. But let's take 5 minutes to hear what we have from our online audience and over Slido. So over to you, Karina.
Thank you so much, Rupa. Thank you to all the panelists until here. And before we turn to Slido, I would really like to open the floor to any questions or interventions from the audience. I'm sure that there are a lot. I think we have time to take 2, and then we will turn to Slido.
Thank you very much. This is a quick one, and maybe it has to go to Matthias. You just mentioned about capacity building. To me, capacity building is good, but it's not enough. It's not enough because I think we also need to look at the climate finance. How does it also support institutional strengthening of farmer organizations? You've seen what is coming from the different panelists. Because they belong to alliances, they belong to networks, and they belong to farmer organizations. They try to connect the grassroots with regional, also global. I think in that, I think capacity building, I would never say it's not good. It's good, but it's not enough. What we need now, how do we ensure that the climate finance also supports institutional strengthening of farmer organizations, alliances, and networks? Thank you.
Shall I respond immediately, or are we still collecting questions?
Let us collect just one more from the audience.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Dinesh from World Council of Churches. Today is the Agriculture, Food and Water Day, and unfortunately, I could not hear much discussions related to water when we already, for food, agriculture, so much of dependent of fresh water. And still, for the past 3 COPs, at least water is in the agenda, and for the 2 COPs, food. But we are still in silos now, within the silos. So I think, how do we break this? I think that's an important challenge before us. Thank you.
So much. I think we do have time to go back to the panelists before we turn to Slido, so let's do that.
Yeah, so Matthias and the water question, probably both of you would like to address.
Yeah, thanks for that question, and you're absolutely right. Of course, we need to strengthen also institutions. And I think farmer organizations are one of the institutions which are extremely important if we want to really work on a transformative agenda, if we really want to work grassroots, but also national level. We need to connect the various levels, and I think these kind of organizations, networks, play a very crucial role. And I can't agree more. And I think this is also a role of international NGOs to make these connections and to support these kind of networks, farmer organizations who play this very important role in getting out of the silos and discussing with government, discussing with communities. Thank you.
Asifa, you did make a mention to water, but maybe you could expand on it a bit.
Well, thank you. The problem is that these are multiple issues, and water, firstly, should be looked at as a global public good. At the current system, there is also only the World Water Conference. There is no real UN mechanism that aligns with the other UN processes to really get water on the agenda. And partly, I think you have already said this, Ryan, that we have more silos in the system because climate change as a COP is led by ministries of environment. That is why it is difficult for negotiators, just to get to answer you a little bit, to get to negotiators to take the declaration and find the language that would be part of the outcome. This is my view, having been in the climate arena for some time under the UNFCCC. So you would only be able to make headways on food systems if you have negotiators that are well equipped, that understand agri-food systems. And that is one solution. And I think maybe we should take an acknowledgement for the FAO and even IFAD for their active involvement since Shamil Sheikh and this year, just to even have the discussion on agri-foods, because on the NDCs, if you analyze NDCs of countries, there is no link between what's in the NDC and what is in our food systems pathways, generally. And therefore, we should probably, within the UN system, have a mechanism at which we are able to consolidate the information. And again, I think under the UN Secretary General, there could be a mechanism, and maybe the CFS could begin to do that. However, the CFS is also having its own legal limitations because the guidelines are not binding. Somebody there has commented about 20 years of right to food guidelines. And if you were to look across the countries, why are we not meeting then the objective of making sure that food is a right in all our nations? It's because some countries are taking it as voluntary and they are not therefore obliged or obligated to actually implement it. And within the UN system, there is more examples of that, and I think even in the water sector. But what is encouraging is that there is a body of knowledge, and within the FAO, there is a land and water division, and there has been discussions about how to make sure that agri-food systems have the element of the role of water, both in terms of saving water and also making sure that there is a system of water governance. But of course, countries have got their own national jurisdictions in terms of their policies on water. Some countries, South Africa, water is not a right of an individual. It's owned by the state for the citizens. Therefore, in that case, we are able to manage the rights. Of course, it has got its own limitations, but other countries do not have that system, and there is no respect of interwater basins management. So I think it's a complex matter for another discussion on another day, and I think we could reflect on it, but I don't think we are also experts that deal with that field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to compliment, Claudia?
Well, first of all, what the gentleman said, that I said we have to break up the silos, and you're absolutely right. We even have silos within our thinking, so breaking that up is most important. I mean, we were not talking about fisheries and any maritime systems, so I mean, that would also be a part of that. So, big field to cover, but you're absolutely right, and that really is a challenge for policymakers, because you're so engaged in one topic, you really stop seeing left and right. So breaking that up and that's actually where we need civil society, once again, to help us bring this perspective. You know, the worst part as a politician, especially when you start questioning how things are done, the worst answer, and you always get that, is that's because we've always done it that way. Mm-hmm. And if that's the only reasoning, it's wrong. So, but to break that up really needs a lot of energy, and it needs a lot of energy before you even see a slight change. And this is, I mean, with these declarations, yes, of course, it is not binding. And I have to completely agree with you with the stock taking, what we are seeing right now, as it is. I mean, we're not yet at the end. It's not enough. And the European Union and Germany, we are very much focusing on bringing agriculture and food system, not just in the adaptation part, but also mitigation, because that's where it really needs to be. But it's a slow process. But really, giving up on it would not be the answer. So even if we say, okay, it's not enough for us yet, it should really be the point, okay, we've taken a small step, next time the step will be bigger. And yeah, next time, sounds like postponing. But we see so many different people, we see different ideas, and we see fear. We see fear because of the change. And to really take people with you, you have to sometimes take a step that is smaller than we would have liked it to be. But as long as it's in the right direction, we still have to take it. Not taking any action should never be the option. And with the right to food, I mean, it's now 20 years, and I can say with our government, we have our own division in our ministry focusing on it. We are focusing on the work for FAO, on the CFS. We are funding that because of it, and it's a very important issue to us. We bring it up in all the meetings we have with other governments because it's so important. And even though it's not binding, we take it as an integral part of our politics. So again, it's not binding, but it is an inspiration, and it's to us, at least in our minds, it is binding for us.
Thank you very much. Over to you again.
Thank you. Coming back to Slido, so the Slido community was very active. Thank you so much for a lot of very interesting interventions and questions. And rest assured, whatever you have typed, you have not typed into the void. We are going to take all of the interventions, we're going to compile them and also send them back to the panelists, so nothing that you have commented will be lost. We're short on time, but I do want to highlight 2 questions that have been upvoted in the Slido. And I know that one of them is very complex, but I just want to park it here and see how much there's possibility to react to it. So the first one would be, how do you see the role of the rule of law in food systems transformation? And then the second one, we've already touched on that, but small-scale farmers receive 0.3% of the total international climate financing. How to reform the system to ensure they get a substantial portion of the funds?
So as you remind us, Karina, we are running out of time. What I would like to do is to let this cook in your head, and you could include them in your closing remarks. And we keep the closing remarks moment fluid, so whoever wants to go first, take a minute to deposit the most important things that you want us to leave this room with. Who would like to go first? Please.
I'll break the ice. So I think, as I mentioned before, everyone has a role to play. I think it is the role of those that are here, the politicians, the decision makers, to create policies that will enable a good and safe environment for the farmer that is on the ground, and also for non-party stakeholders to be able to mobilize resources so that they also contribute into the food systems chain. The only challenge is when those who have roles to play do not meet or do not, achieve their goals. That is when, things get so mixed up because the negotiations wouldn't have been going on and on if people would just meet, their goals and targets. But I think this is what I just have to say as a closing, that we all have a role to play, and let's play our role and ensure that we meet our targets and our goals.
Thank you very much. And what might be non-binding, to treat it as binding and take responsibility. Thanks a lot. Matthias, I see you have the mic. Yeah, you're ready to go?
No, I think my main takeaway is here that we have to bring the vulnerable people here in the room, in the discussion on the COP, so that people are aware what we are talking about. People are suffering from these climate shocks, and they deserve to be taken seriously. So that's my first the most important thing. There is a human right to food, and therefore also governments can be taken to court, of course. And I see that there are more and more initiatives, think tanks, law firms who are dealing with that. So there is a kind of momentum, I feel, at the moment, that not only environmental violations are be brought to court, but also human rights violations when it comes to the violation of the right to food.
Thank you very much. And McLaren's?
Thank you very much. So, in my opening statement, I've mentioned that part of the reason why World Vision is launching the Enough campaign is because there was a lack of data on child malnutrition. So coming to the question of 0.3 climate finance only going to smallholder farmers, I think let's keep the momentum. Let's gather the evidence. Let's gather the data. There is opportunity under Decision 3 of COP27 on Sharm el-Sheikh, climate action on agriculture and food security. That should be implemented in the next 3 years. So let's take this to the decision makers, to the parties. This is a party-driven process, and we have opportunity for us to do that. So my parting words is, it is not just enough to talk about food systems transformation, but there's urgent need for us to act on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see that you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. I think my takeaway now in my role in CFS is maybe to explore with the member states and partners how best do we prepare information in terms of a credible monitoring system on the progressive realization of a right to food in order to enable a process with Geneva where countries must go and report, at least for starters, before we get to the court processes of them being sued at a correct, relevant point. Just as an instrument to enable that. And my last point is that I think the visibility of CFS is important, especially for civil society mechanism, but they need support in respect of their effective participation and ongoing participation, because currently the CFS in our partnership is only supported through the FAO and the other Rome-based agencies, and of course, some of our international donors, some of the countries like Germany. So we'd like to encourage Germany to continue to support civil society to enable effective participation in the area of right to food, especially under the CFS. And I'd like to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Ryan, please go.
I'll let you end it. First of all, thank you to the online participants. I can read your supporting messages through the screen here, so thanks a lot for your support. Concluding remarks. One, if you truly believe that food is a right to every human being, independent of the race, age, sexual orientation, and anything that defines them, then we can really talk about food insecurity. Before you really believe that, it's very difficult to talk about that topic. Second, accountability is the only way moving forward. The time for ambition is over for me, honestly. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And it's a great moment now to hear from Claudia, because she would synthesize all of this. And I just raised the bar a bit higher.
Yes, thank you so much for that. No, I really have a lot of thoughts in my mind. It's really difficult to just boil it down to a very few. I think, first of all, and this is maybe the most important one, when we talk about the right to food and food security and building resilient systems within the climate crisis we're having and fighting the climate crisis, my most important point really is that we have to find partners that are not just talking about, well, here we are preaching to the choir. I mean, we are all talking about this. We have to talk about this to people who are not dealing with it. We have to build groups, we have to build partnerships with those, as I said, that are not on, they are not seeing the topic yet. Because even only then we can really make the impact we need to be making. This is probably the first one. The second one is, it's good to not be satisfied with what we're doing. It is good to always want more. And it's good to strive for the best. Because what we have seen in the world, well, in development, it's not a straight line in any direction. It's usually the beginning is the hardest. But that's really, we have to put all the forces into it, that we not only create the moment, but we keep it alive, that we really foster the development and to really bring those things together. And thirdly, and this is really something we are doing, is do it multilaterally with the organizations, not being the one player, but we have the organizations and we should use what is there. We do not need parallel structures. We have some of them, I know, but we do not need more, because we have a lot of scarcities. Water, our soil, but also finances, and then also people, and most importantly, time. Time is scarce. In reaching our climate goals, but also personally, so we really have to be efficient in what we are doing, and we have the structures for doing that. Strengthen them, work with them, and especially talk about it with people, because only then we can make an impact. And from the talks, there will be the action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as a moderator, I cannot possibly find better words to close this by. But just to summarize, it's very important that we work together, so in multilateral ways. Time is short. We have a lot of development deficit, food insecurity, water insecurity, new challenges of adapting to climate change, mitigating conflict. So the only way we can succeed is by working together. The system that we are a part of here now is far from perfect, but there is no other. So let's keep our ambitions high, push ourselves, combine forces, and like we did in the dialogue today, bring multiple stakeholders together with very, very divergent views, challenging views, but this is what will make our ambitions match the challenge that is out there. So I wish all of us a lot of courage, a lot of persistence, but also great collaboration. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.